There's a strange pattern in the human mind, the way it seeks order where there might be none, meaning where there might be chaos, purpose in what might be pure accident. For thousands of years, the human brain has been crafting explanations for everything it couldn't yet understand. And in that process, it built gods, entire worlds of belief, authority, and devotion, often out of nothing more than imagination, fear, and need. It's not stupidity that makes people believe in gods. It's psychology. It's the way our brains evolved. We're wired to see intention everywhere. If a branch breaks behind us, we assume someone or something caused it. If lightning strikes a tree, the primitive brain looks for a will behind it. This instinct was once useful. It kept our ancestors alive. But it also laid the foundation for belief, a system of invisible agents, watching, judging, rewarding, punishing. What began as survival instinct turned into mythology, and then religion. But the real question isn't whether those beliefs are true. It's why we need them so badly in the first place. Why does the human mind find comfort in something it can't see, can't prove, and often can't even define? The answer begins deep in our evolutionary history. Long before temples or scriptures, the human mind had already learned to connect dots that weren't there. We evolved to overdetect patterns, because missing one could be fatal. If you assume the rustle in the grass is a predator, and you're wrong, you lose nothing. But if you assume it's the wind, and you're wrong, you die. The brain evolved to err on the side of caution, to assume agency, even when there was none. And that's how the gods began to whisper into human thought. Belief, in many ways, is the brain's side effect, a kind of glitch in its pattern-seeking mechanism. Once language and imagination appeared, that glitch grew stronger. We began telling stories about the unseen forces behind storms and stars, life and death, love and loss. Over time, those stories hardened into doctrine, and belief stopped being a question of curiosity and became a matter of loyalty. The brain, meanwhile, rewards belief. When we feel certain, when we think we understand something bigger than ourselves, it releases dopamine. It gives us peace, confidence, even a sense of belonging. That's why belief feels good, why doubt feels uncomfortable, and why letting go of comforting illusions can feel like betrayal. It's not just about faith, it's about chemistry. And so belief persists, not because evidence demands it, but because the brain craves it. The idea of a divine plan, an ultimate meaning, and a watchful parent figure all reduce anxiety about uncertainty and death. A god, in that sense, isn't a creator of the universe, but a creation of the human need to not feel small, lost, or meaningless in it. Yet when you trace the history of religions, they mirror the fears and knowledge limits of their times. Early humans worshipped the sun and sky because they didn't understand weather. Later, as science explained the physical world, belief adapted, retreating from the visible to the invisible, from the physical to the metaphysical. Each god became less measurable, less accountable, until belief itself became a virtue, even in the absence of reason. The brain doesn't care about truth the way we think it does. It cares about coherence, about emotional stability. If a belief holds a person's world together, they'll defend it no matter what. That's why evidence rarely changes anyone's mind, because belief isn't built on logic, it's built on identity. The brain ties its sense of self to its beliefs, so questioning them feels like an attack on the person themselves. But this isn't just about religion. The same mechanism fuels nationalism, conspiracy theories, cults, and ideologies. The brain creates patterns, finds meaning, and assigns value, often without evidence, because it must. It's a survival tool, just repurposed for a world that no longer demands it. The gods may have changed, but the mechanism behind them has not. As neuroscience advances, we're beginning to see belief for what it really is, not a spiritual gift, but a cognitive illusion, one that feels utterly real because it's produced by the same circuits that define reality itself. To understand this, we don't need to mock believers. We need to understand the machinery of belief, the brain that prefers comfort to chaos and certainty to truth. Because at its core, belief in gods isn't a mystery of the divine. It's a story of the human mind and how easily it can turn its own imagination into reality. The human brain is not just a pattern seeker. It's also a social machine. From birth, we are wired to look to others for guidance, for reassurance, for what is normal. This social wiring amplifies belief. If everyone around you is convinced a particular god exists, your brain interprets their certainty as evidence. Social cohesion, cooperation, and group survival often outweighed individual skepticism in evolutionary terms. Those who doubted too loudly could be ostracized or ignored, which in a small tribe could be deadly. So the brain learned to align belief with the group, even if the logical evidence was lacking. This creates a feedback loop. Communities reward conformity with acceptance, praise, or protection, and punish deviation with shame, ridicule, or exclusion. Belief becomes not just an intellectual exercise, but a social survival tool. The emotional weight of acceptance and the fear of rejection reinforce the brain's desire for certainty. And once belief takes root, it becomes remarkably resilient, almost impervious to counter-evidence. Neuroscience shows us that specific regions of the brain are involved in this process. The temporal lobe, for instance, plays a role in mystical experiences and the perception of unseen agents. Stimulation of this area can produce vivid sensations of presence, a voice, a light, a feeling of being watched. To the brain, these experiences feel real, yet they are entirely internal. They are self-generated. They are illusions, but illusions powerful enough to convince entire cultures that they have touched the divine. Other regions, like the prefrontal cortex, handle reasoning and prediction. But reasoning isn't always used to find truth. It's often used to justify pre-existing beliefs. This explains why people can hold contradictory beliefs, defend supernatural claims against evidence, and rationalize doctrines that contradict their daily experiences. The brain isn't malfunctioning. It's functioning exactly as it evolved to protect stability, identity, and group cohesion. Emotions also play a critical role. Anxiety, uncertainty, and fear of death are among the strongest drivers of belief. When we confront the unknown, illness, mortality, the chaos of existence, the brain searches for comfort. Gods, spirits, and higher powers are evolutionary coping mechanisms. They reduce existential anxiety by creating a sense of control in an uncontrollable world. When we pray, we may not change reality, but we change our perception of it. We feel calmer, more hopeful, more secure, even if nothing has actually changed outside the mind. This effect has been studied extensively. People with higher levels of existential anxiety are more likely to embrace religious beliefs. Threats to personal safety, social instability, or uncertainty about the future increase religious devotion. Conversely, when societies become more stable, education levels rise, and scientific explanations are available, religiosity tends to decline. Belief, then, is less a matter of truth and more a response to circumstance, a psychological comfort blanket. The human brain is also prone to what psychologists call agency detection bias. It interprets randomness as intent. A rustling bush becomes a predator. A sudden illness becomes a punishment. A fortunate event becomes a blessing. This bias was adaptive in evolutionary terms. It kept people alive. But it also primes the mind for belief in gods who watch, judge, and intervene. Over time, these cognitive tendencies were codified into religious systems, rituals, prayers, rules, and myths, each designed to reinforce the illusion of order and control. Stories, myths, and rituals serve another function. They make abstract beliefs tangible. They translate invisible agents into observable actions and social norms. They teach loyalty, obedience, and morality, often by invoking supernatural authority. Even when the events themselves are fictional, the emotional impact is real. The brain responds to narrative in ways it does not respond to abstract argument. A parable, a miracle story, or a myth about creation can shape thought, behavior, and identity far more powerfully than evidence-based reasoning. Consider the role of cognitive dissonance. Once someone has invested years of time, energy, and identity into a belief system, abandoning it produces intense mental discomfort. The brain prefers coherence. It rationalizes inconsistencies, reshapes memories, and interprets experiences to fit the narrative. Contradictions are not obstacles. They are opportunities for the brain to reinforce belief, because preserving a stable self-concept is more important than seeking truth. This is why believers often double down when confronted with evidence to the contrary, and why entire institutions resist reform or transparency. It's also worth noting the role of childhood conditioning. Young minds are particularly receptive to authority, repetition, and story. When a child is taught from a young age that a particular deity exists, that obedience is rewarded, and questioning is punished, the brain encodes these lessons deeply. By adulthood, these beliefs feel innate, part of the self, inseparable from identity. Even when reasoning develops, it is filtered through these early experiences. The brain has learned to trust the narrative before it can evaluate it critically. Finally, there's the allure of simplicity. Life is complicated, unpredictable, and often terrifying. Belief systems provide simple answers, rules for behavior, explanations for suffering, and promises of justice or salvation. The human brain craves simplicity and certainty because the alternative, uncertainty, is stressful, distracting, and destabilizing. Religion packages complexity into narratives that satisfy the emotional and cognitive needs of the mind. It's elegant in a psychological sense, even if it's inaccurate in a factual sense. Understanding all of this doesn't require animosity toward believers. It requires curiosity about the mind itself. The gods we create are reflections of our own cognitive architecture, shaped by evolution, emotion, and social pressure. They are not external truths, they are internal projections. The mind produces them because it must, because survival, identity, and comfort depend on it. And recognizing this, we can begin to see religion not as an eternal mystery, but as a profoundly human invention, a cognitive solution to problems we no longer face in the same ways. As societies grew more complex, so did their religions. Early gods were often local, tied to rivers, mountains, or crops. But as civilizations expanded, gods became organized, codified, and bureaucratic. This wasn't random. The human brain craves predictability, and societies needed predictable behavior from their members. Religion became a social tool as much as a spiritual one. Moral codes, commandments, and ritual observances were embedded into belief systems because the brain responds strongly to rules backed by authority, and because obedience keeps communities stable. Morality is a particularly fascinating aspect of this. Humans are naturally cooperative, but the brain struggles to enforce long-term fairness without some external authority. Gods filled that role. They became invisible enforcers, ensuring that even when no one was watching, people would act in ways that benefited the group. The brain accepted these unseen monitors easily because it already assumes agency behind events. Punishment and reward from the divine made morality concrete, even if the morality itself was culturally constructed rather than universal. This also explains the persistence of religious belief across centuries. Even as science explained storms, disease, and astronomy, the brain continued to find value in gods. Not because gods were necessary to explain the world, but because they fulfilled psychological and social needs that science alone could not. Certainty, comfort, community, identity, these are the scaffolding on which belief rests. The brain has an insatiable appetite for them, and religion provides them efficiently. While appearing to offer something higher, religions also evolved to exploit cognitive biases. Miracles, prophecies, and sacred texts all engage the brain's pattern detection, storytelling, and agency-seeking circuits. They trigger emotional responses that reinforce belief. Rituals and repetition strengthen neural pathways, making belief feel automatic, intuitive, and self-evident. Even skeptics can feel the pull of communal ceremonies, chants, or prayers because the brain responds to rhythm, social synchronization, and shared attention, all without requiring actual divine interaction. Throughout history, religion has also intertwined with power. Leaders quickly realize that controlling belief controls behavior. The brain is particularly susceptible to authority figures, especially when paired with threats or rewards. Gods and rulers became linked. To question the deity was to question the king. To rebel against doctrine was to destabilize the state. In this way, religious belief became reinforced not just by inner psychology, but by external social pressure, education, and culture. Doubt became dangerous, not only spiritually but politically, and the human brain learned to avoid it instinctively. Even today, these mechanisms persist. Modern believers may not fear literal fire and brimstone punishment, but social consequences remain powerful. Ostracism, ridicule, or loss of belonging activate the same neural circuits that once protected humans from physical danger. The brain interprets rejection as threat, and it reacts accordingly. Belief, in that sense, is not just a cognitive choice. It's a deeply ingrained survival strategy, one that has been reinforced over millennia through culture, story, and society. The brain also thrives on narrative, which explains why religious myths are so compelling. Humans are wired to understand the world in terms of cause and effect, heroes and villains, beginnings and ends. Science often lacks these satisfying narratives. Events happen probabilistically, without inherent purpose or moral balance. Religion fills this void, offering stories that satisfy emotional and cognitive needs simultaneously. The mind prefers a meaningful story to an indifferent fact. This preference explains why religious explanations persist even when scientific explanations are available. The brain simply values coherence, and emotional resonance over accuracy. Furthermore, religion exploits what psychologists call the just world hypothesis. We want to believe that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, that the universe is fair and meaningful. The brain struggles to accept randomness and injustice. Gods and divine plans provide a framework in which suffering can be rationalized, tragedy can be understood, and hope can persist. Even in situations where evidence suggests randomness or cruelty, believers can maintain faith because the brain is wired to favor meaning over chance. One of the most striking examples is the human fascination with death. Awareness of mortality is unique to humans, and it's profoundly destabilizing. The brain instinctively seeks ways to manage this terror. Religion offers answers: afterlife, reincarnation, or divine protection. These beliefs reduce existential anxiety in a measurable way. Studies show that when people are reminded of their mortality, religiosity often increases. The need to feel safe, valued, and eternal is wired deeply into our cognition, and religion exploits this wiring with precision. Cultural reinforcement ensures these beliefs persist. Stories, traditions, and institutions transmit religious narratives from generation to generation. The brain not only internalizes these ideas, but integrates them into identity. Questioning belief feels like questioning self. This is why religious identity is often stronger than factual reasoning. The human mind evolved to protect belief because belief is tied to survival, both personal and social. Rejecting belief without preparation can trigger anxiety, guilt, and social consequences. The brain resists instinctively. Yet despite the strength of these mechanisms, understanding them offers freedom. When we recognize that belief is a product of neural wiring, social pressure, and emotional need, we can separate truth from comfort. The gods, the rituals, the moral codes, they are all human constructions, created to serve human minds. They are remarkable achievements of imagination and social engineering. But they are not evidence of the supernatural. They are evidence of the human brain and how extraordinarily skilled it is at turning need into reality. Even as science advances, the human brain clings to supernatural thinking. We like to think of ourselves as rational, evidence-driven creatures, yet our cognition is full of shortcuts, biases, and illusions. The same pattern-seeking mind that once helped ancestors survive still searches for meaning in randomness. Coincidences feel like signs. Sudden successes feel like blessings. Tragedies feel like punishment. The brain is wired to impose order where there is none, and gods are a natural output of that wiring. Cognitive biases reinforce this tendency. Confirmation bias, for instance, leads the mind to notice evidence that supports belief and ignore evidence that contradicts it. The brain actively edits experience to maintain coherence. It remembers hits and forgets misses. People pray, and sometimes outcomes align with desires, reinforcing the illusion of divine intervention. When outcomes don't align, rationalizations kick in. God works in mysterious ways, or it wasn't meant to be. The mind maintains belief even in the face of overwhelming randomness. Pareidolia, the tendency to perceive familiar patterns like faces in clouds, trees, or stains, also plays a role. Our ancestors were wired to detect agency everywhere. It was safer to assume intention than ignore potential threats. Today, this translates into seeing the divine in ordinary events. The brain experiences presence where none exists. Mystical experiences, visions, and feelings of transcendence are neurological phenomena, not messages from beyond, and yet they feel undeniable because the brain interprets them as real. Religious rituals exploit this deeply. Chanting, synchronized movement, and shared attention activate reward centers and strengthen social bonds. The mind interprets these sensations as meaningful, sacred, real. They are intensely emotional, reinforcing belief even when logic suggests otherwise. Participation produces a sense of community, comfort, and certainty that the brain craves. Science can explain why these rituals feel powerful, but the brain experiences them as validation of the divine. Even morality is caught in this web. Studies show that humans possess natural moral instincts independent of religion: empathy, fairness, reciprocity. Religions often codify these instincts, but they don't create them. The gods become enforcers of behaviors the brain already favors. Morality feels stronger when attached to supernatural authority, because the brain interprets punishment and reward as ultimate consequences. Yet morality itself is rooted in human evolution, not in heaven or hell. Belief persists, in part because humans are not just logical, they are emotional. We prioritize survival, security, and social cohesion over abstract truth. The brain resists information that threatens its sense of order. Doubt creates anxiety. Loss of belief threatens identity. Religion thrives because it aligns with these needs. The human mind evolved to crave certainty, meaning, and reassurance, and religion delivers all three with astonishing efficiency. Education and exposure to science weaken some forms of belief, but even highly educated individuals experience magical thinking. Studies find that scientists, engineers, and rationalists still display biases, pattern-seeking, intuition over evidence, and occasional supernatural interpretations. Rationality competes with instinct, but instinct is powerful. Our brains did not evolve to detect ultimate truth. They evolved to keep us alive, reduce anxiety, and maintain social cohesion. Gods are a byproduct of this evolution, not evidence of reality beyond it. The persistence of belief in the modern world highlights another principle. The emotional payoff often outweighs the cost of error. Humans rarely face immediate consequences for believing in gods. Even if belief is factually incorrect, it provides comfort, hope, and social belonging. The mind values these benefits more than accuracy. In this sense, religion is not about truth at all. It's about the brain optimizing for emotional and social well-being. And yet awareness can shift perception. Understanding belief as a product of cognition allows us to examine it without fear, guilt, or bias. The brain's desire for certainty, social reinforcement, and pattern recognition is understandable. Recognizing these processes illuminates why gods exist in the mind, why faith feels real, and why rational skepticism can feel threatening. This understanding does not belittle human experience. It explains it. It shows that belief is not mystical, but profoundly human. Ultimately, the gods exist not in the skies, but in the architecture of the brain. They are projections of fear, hope, pattern recognition, and social necessity. They arise naturally from cognitive processes designed to navigate uncertainty, danger, and mortality. The more we study the mind, the clearer it becomes. The human brain creates gods out of thin air, not to deceive, but to survive, to comfort, and to make sense of a universe that is indifferent and chaotic. Belief in gods has shaped history in profound ways. Entire civilizations have been built on faith, and entire conflicts ignited by it. Wars, conquests, and political struggles have often been justified with divine authority. The brain, seeking certainty and social cohesion, embraces these narratives readily. When belief is intertwined with power, questioning it becomes dangerous. The human mind naturally equates religious authority with social and moral order, which is why dogma can persist even when it causes harm. Consider the moral paradoxes religion produces. Sacred texts often contain contradictory or outdated rules, yet the brain prioritizes coherence and loyalty over scrutiny. Followers interpret these contradictions creatively, rationalizing them in ways that preserve belief. Cognitive dissonance is not a flaw, it's a feature of the mind. It allows humans to navigate complex realities without destabilizing their identity. The brain rewards resolution of internal conflict, even if the resolution is false. In this way, belief is self-reinforcing. Religious systems have historically offered structure, purpose, and stability. Festivals, rituals, and communal gatherings provide rhythm and meaning to daily life. They reduce anxiety and give the brain predictable outcomes. These systems also reinforce group identity and cooperation. In a pre-modern world, this provided tangible advantages: survival, social cohesion, and mutual support. Belief was functional, but as societies advance, many of the original survival advantages diminish, while the cognitive mechanisms remain. Modern secular frameworks, interestingly, provide similar benefits without supernatural claims. Science, art, philosophy, and community fulfill many of the same psychological needs: understanding, narrative, belonging, and meaning. They offer explanations, ethical guidance, and shared experiences. The brain still seeks patterns, stories, and social connection, but now it can satisfy these drives without invoking invisible agents. Yet even in secular contexts, people remain susceptible to superstition, ritual, and magical thinking because the underlying cognitive architecture is unchanged. Religion also shapes morality and justice, often in ways that have real-world consequences. Belief in divine punishment or reward can motivate pro-social behavior, encourage charity, and reduce selfishness. At the same time, it can perpetuate prejudice, exclusion, and violence against outsiders. The brain responds emotionally to perceived moral authority, even if that authority is imaginary. This demonstrates both the power and the danger of belief. It can inspire good, but it can also justify cruelty when directed toward perceived threats or deviance. The interplay between belief and authority is particularly revealing. Religious institutions often consolidate power by monopolizing narrative. They define morality, control education, and shape law. The human brain, predisposed to trust authority and seek group cohesion, accepts these impositions with minimal resistance. Even when individuals experience doubt, the social and emotional cost of expressing it is high. This explains why belief systems are remarkably resilient across generations, even as the world changes dramatically around them. One fascinating aspect is the universality of religious cognition. Anthropologists find that no human society has existed without supernatural beliefs. This suggests that the tendency to believe is not cultural, but neurological. It arises naturally from the architecture of the human mind: pattern seeking, agency detection, threat anticipation, and social conformity. Even in isolated or technologically advanced communities, these cognitive mechanisms produce gods, spirits, or sacred narratives. The human brain seems wired to invent the divine, yet the persistence of religious belief does not indicate truth. It indicates necessity, psychological necessity. Humans need certainty, comfort, purpose, and social belonging. Gods, rituals, and sacred stories satisfy these needs efficiently. They are the products of evolution, not evidence of supernatural reality. The brain interprets the emotional payoff of belief as verification, reinforcing patterns that serve survival rather than factual accuracy. In short, the mind values what keeps it functioning over what reflects the world objectively. Understanding this offers both clarity and liberation. Recognizing that belief is a human creation rooted in cognitive and social mechanisms allows us to examine it critically without fear or hostility. It illuminates the patterns behind history, culture, and personal experience. It shows that gods are not external arbiters of morality or reality, but reflections of human need, ingenuity, and imagination. By studying the brain, we uncover the machinery that produces devotion, awe, and faith, and we see how natural, inevitable, and understandable it all really is. Cognitive science has offered remarkable insight into how belief forms, persists, and even strengthens over time. Experiments show that the human brain actively constructs reality, filling gaps with assumptions, patterns, and agency. In one classic study, participants were exposed to random sequences of events, yet many insisted they detected patterns or purpose where none existed. The brain is a story-making machine. It prefers a coherent narrative to ambiguity, even if the narrative is false. Other studies demonstrate how social reinforcement amplifies belief. In experiments where people observe a group consensus, individuals often conform to the majority opinion, even against their own senses. This is true not only for trivial judgments, but for moral and existential claims. The desire to fit in, to avoid social conflict, is embedded in our neural circuitry. Religion leverages this instinct. Belief is rarely just personal. It is social, collective, and emotionally reinforced. The brain equates conformity with safety, belonging, and acceptance. Neuroscientists have also studied mystical and transcendent experiences. The brain can generate intense feelings of presence, connection, and awe, often under stress, meditation, or ritual. Temporal lobe activity in particular correlates with these sensations. Participants report vivid spiritual encounters that feel real in every sense, yet brain scans reveal purely neurological origins. The mind interprets internal signals as evidence of something external. The divine is a projection of our own neural activity, compelling, emotional, and convincing. Psychology has uncovered another mechanism: the need for cognitive closure. Humans naturally prefer definitive answers to uncertainty. Ambiguity triggers anxiety. Clarity produces relief. Religious narratives deliver closure efficiently. They tell us who we are, why we exist, and what will happen when we die. They promise cosmic justice and moral order. The brain rewards certainty, even if it is illusory, with calm, confidence, and dopamine. This emotional reinforcement strengthens belief and makes skepticism emotionally costly. Real-life examples illustrate this vividly. Consider people who survive disasters or illness and interpret their survival as divine intervention. Statistically, survival is random or attributable to known factors, yet the brain constructs a narrative of purpose and intentionality. Similarly, people often report answered prayers, not because the universe responded, but because selective attention, probability, and memory biases create the impression of efficacy. The mind is a storyteller. It turns coincidence into meaning and randomness into destiny. Belief can also be manipulated intentionally. Cults, authoritarian regimes, and charismatic leaders exploit cognitive biases for control. Repetition, ritual, isolation, and social reinforcement create powerful, nearly unshakable beliefs. The brain internalizes these patterns as truth, and doubt feels threatening. Even when followers are confronted with evidence that contradicts doctrine, they double down. Cognitive dissonance is resolved by rationalization, strengthening the original belief. This is not about stupidity. It is about the brain protecting coherence, identity, and social safety. Interestingly, secular or scientific communities experience analogous dynamics. Groups of rational thinkers are not immune to pattern-seeking, confirmation bias, or social conformity. The difference is that secular systems encourage ongoing questioning, transparency, and empirical verification. Belief in supernatural agents is replaced by trust in evidence and logic, yet the underlying cognitive machinery remains the same. Humans are wired to seek narrative, agency, and social reinforcement. The method changes, but the mental drive persists. Understanding these mechanisms has practical implications. It explains why disbelief can feel uncomfortable, why doubt is socially risky, and why evidence alone rarely convinces believers. The brain values emotional stability over truth. Recognition of this allows for a compassionate perspective on faith. It is a product of survival instincts, social dynamics, and neural architecture. Belief is natural, inevitable, and psychologically adaptive, even if it is factually incorrect. At the same time, awareness provides freedom. Once we see belief as a product of cognition, we can examine it critically. We can recognize when our own minds construct patterns that aren't real, or when social pressure influences our convictions. We can satisfy the psychological needs that religion once met, meaning community and moral guidance, through reason, creativity, and secular frameworks. The gods, the rituals, and the sacred stories are human inventions. They are extraordinary reflections of how the mind works, not evidence of external divinity. And it's in that tension between what we want to be true and what we can actually verify that belief keeps finding room to grow. Even when the evidence doesn't point where people hope it will, the mind looks for comfort, for closure, for a narrative that feels complete, and belief offers that, almost like a shortcut around uncertainty. But there's something surprisingly freeing about admitting that uncertainty is real and not something to fear. The world doesn't shrink when we let go of supernatural answers. It actually gets bigger, because every mystery becomes a genuine question rather than a protected explanation. Curiosity becomes a strength instead of a threat. And the lack of predetermined meaning doesn't imply emptiness. It suggests that meaning is something we can build, not something we need handed to us. This becomes even clearer when you think about how much human progress came from stepping outside of inherited conclusions. The moment people felt allowed to question the sky, the earth, the body, the mind, everything changed. It's almost as if doubt, the very thing so many belief systems try to suppress, has been the real engine of human understanding. And when you follow that thread, you can see why belief often pushes back so hard. A belief system can't survive if it's always open to revision. But reality can and does. That's why the more we learn about the brain, the more the old explanations fall apart. Not because people were foolish, but because they were working with limited tools. What they created wasn't evidence of divine truth. It was evidence of human creativity trying to make sense of a world that often felt overwhelming. And once you see belief as an adaptive response rather than a revelation, the picture changes. Instead of asking why people fall for ideas, the question becomes why those ideas were useful for so long. Maybe they stitched communities together when nothing else could. Maybe they offered structure in times of chaos. Maybe they helped people cope with suffering before medicine, psychology, and science could offer real, testable help. But if belief served a purpose in the past, that doesn't mean it must guide the future. The human brain hasn't stopped evolving, and neither has our understanding. There's something powerful in recognizing that the very machinery that once invented gods is the same machinery that allows us to understand that invention. It's a step towards something more honest, more grounded, and ultimately more human. And this is where the story turns into a choice. Not a dramatic crossroads, not a battle between good and evil, but a quiet decision about how we want to engage with reality. Whether we want answers that feel comforting or answers that actually hold up. Whether we're content with explanations born from fear and hope, or whether we're willing to face the world as it is with all its complexity and uncertainty. If the mind creates belief out of thin air, then it can also let it go, not by force, not by ridicule, but by understanding how it forms in the first place. And once that becomes clear, belief loses its weight. It stops feeling like an eternal truth and starts looking like a human habit, one that can be replaced with something better grounded, more open, and more connected to reality. And the fascinating part is that letting go doesn't create a void. It creates space for clearer thinking, for genuine wonder, for questions that don't need supernatural padding to be meaningful. It makes the universe feel bigger, not smaller. It makes life feel more immediate, not less significant. Because meaning doesn't come from believing we were made for a purpose. It comes from recognizing that purpose is something we craft ourselves, through curiosity, through connection, through the choices we make and the lives we touch. And when you see it that way, the world doesn't look empty at all. It looks honest. It looks open. It looks like something you can engage with on your own terms, without inherited narratives shaping every thought. So the God delusion, if you want to call it that, isn't a flaw in the human brain. It's a byproduct of a mind trying its best with the tools it had. But those tools have changed. Our understanding has changed, and we're not bound to the stories our ancestors told themselves to feel safe. We can tell new stories, ones based on what we actually know, not what we fear. Stories that don't need invisible beings to fill in the gaps. Stories that grow as our knowledge grows. And maybe that's the real turning point. Not abandoning belief out of rebellion, but moving beyond it because the world is interesting enough without adding anything supernatural to it. And once that realization settles in, the air feels clearer, the world feels sharper, and the thin layer of invention that once hovered over everything finally dissolves, leaving the real landscape underneath. A landscape that's not guided by gods, but shaped by human minds doing their best to understand themselves and the universe they're part of. And that might be the most profound realization of all, that we don't need belief to make life meaningful. We just need the courage to see things as they are, and the willingness to keep asking questions, even when the answers aren't guaranteed. Because in the end, the truth doesn't need protection. It just needs to be seen. And once you see it, you can't go back, and you won't want to.